Okay, so chapter 16, it's going to be the last chapter in the 6th edition ACE of Certified Personal Trainer certification textbook. And it is, in one sense, it's kind of like saving the best for last. It's legal guidelines and business considerations. A lot of information is packed into this last chapter. And again, like a couple of the other chapters beforehand, this is one of those chapters where once you pass the exam, you'll definitely want to go back to reference for information. There's a number of legal forms that you can look at, of course, record keeping, and some other components that you're not going to have to memorize, of course, but you will want to access again after when you're actually training people. Just keep in mind, we live in probably one of the most litigious countries on the planet, and so what we really have to be careful of are, is getting ourselves into problems and issues legally that we could have easily avoided. And that's why ACE is so big on understanding scope of practice, and legal guidelines like negligence, things like that. You just don't want to get into a position where you could have done something that would have ensured that you did not hurt a client. I mean, look, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure we're helping people, not hurting them. And again, that's why the IFT model was designed the way it was designed. But there are incidences after incidences all the time of trainers that just are not training people according to basic industry standards, and people get hurt and then they get sued. And we just don't want any of that to happen. So we got to be really, really careful and very cognizant of the legal issues that go along with being a personal trainer. Just keep in mind, the best scenario, safest environment, the most professional, knowledgeable trainer, there's still risks associated with physical exercise. And so it's just the nature of the beast, and we want to make sure that we have all our bases covered. So the business considerations, things like that, like business structures, you can read through them. They're interesting, but for the most part, it's not going to be the most important information, because these type of information bases actually change. They're modified. It depends on the state that you live in. And so irrespective of what you're reading, just keep in mind that you got to check with your state first and foremost before you start moving forward with developing an LLC or an S Corp or anything like that. So there are these different business structures. There are what we call sole proprietorships, partnerships, and I'm just going to come through here. You can read through them. If you're not familiar with any of these, my recommendation for sure is that you get a lawyer. Your CPA can be helpful in some of these, in some of the development or creation of your business structures. Most personal trainers will do sole proprietorships or S corporations, things like that, because they're simple, easy to take care of. You're probably not going to form a corporation. You might form an LLC, but you can read through the information up to 744. And then when you get to table 16.1, this is really where it's all coalesced into what you would be really more interested in, and anything else is looking at the pros and the cons, excuse me, of the different types of business structures. Like I say, for the most part, we see trainers doing sole proprietorships, sometimes doing LLCs, but you can read through it. You can do franchising opportunities, and there are pros and cons to that as well. Again, the information is good. There's a fair amount of it, but I would get through and look at your tables and make sure you memorize pretty much the information in these tables. Not sure I know many trainers that are interested in opening a franchise, but it's in here. You can become, this is, by the way, this is more important probably, is on page 747, the independent contractor versus the employee. If you're an employee, you're going to get, you're going to obviously be hired onto with a company. You'll get a W-2, and this is for tax purposes. Really, it's or you can be an independent contractor, which means you would have gone through the process of creating your own business, like sole proprietorship, and then wherever you're working would give you a 1099 tax form, and that simply means this is what you got paid. If that's the case, and even if you didn't do independent contracting with a particular company, there are scenarios where gyms will simply allow you to come in and pay them rent. You could do that as well. So independent contractor versus employee, and there are, there's pros and cons to both of these. It just depends on your personality, what you're trying to do from a business perspective. And even though even though personal trainers at the bottom of page 748, who's an independent contractor, will adhere to the fitness center's general rules. The bottom line is that if you're in somebody else's facility, there are basic rules and ethical practices that you have to maintain no matter what, whether you're an employee or an independent contractor. And so contracts, now again, keep in mind, there's information in here you can read. It's important. However, always seek counsel, professional counsel from a lawyer anytime you start getting into anything related to legal contracts. Negligence. Now here on page 751, we get into an area where you can have some real issues. You need to understand negligence and the different types of negligence that are that there are. And there's negligence where you should have done something but you didn't. And then there's negligence where you just didn't do any, you forgot, or whatever the case was, is there was something that you should have done, right? And you did not do it. There's something that you did and you did it wrong or improper. So spotting somebody and they get hurt, right, while you're spotting them, okay? Not cleaning up a water spill, not spotting somebody, right? Not spotting somebody is negligence, right? And they get hurt. Spotting somebody and doing it incorrectly and turning your head or something like that while they're doing their, whatever the case is, that's also negligence. So we call it negligence of omission and commission to substantiate. And of course, here is the legal establishment of negligence in a court of law, and there's 4 of them that you should read. Then there's the important legal forms. Stop for a second and do yourself a big favor. Take a little bit of time, read through each one of these. It is critical that you have these important forms, these particular forms filled out before you even start training people. It's really important. Now, of course, ACE has given you some samples, and they're pretty good. Informed consent. Now, again, there's an explanation for each one of these. That's helpful. Waivers are important to know, and again, you can have your particular lawyer or counsel look over these. Now, these are fine. These ACE has them, so they're good. But if you needed to do your own, or you wanted to do your own, you would definitely have a lawyer look over them. So continuing with negligence into the inherent risk of exercise, obviously. So now you get to inherent risk and the procedures that go along with the training process. Again, read through it. It's not like you're going to be taking a whole lot of notes when you do this, except of course, if you see bolded terms, words, statute of limitations, write them down. Make sure you at least understand them. It's not a lot of them in here in chapter 16. Record keeping. Look, again, irrespective of how you do your business, whether you're an employee, independent contractor, own a business and just provide a little training and have trainers working for you, you've got to keep good records, medical history, record of the exercises themselves, because you got to be able to, and ACE actually gives you an example at the beginning of the chapter of a classic situation where a trainer is pushing their client. The guy has a stroke. right? He has a stroke. I mean, and he gets awarded this huge amount. I'm pretty sure it's a stroke. But there's so many times where this has happened. It's kind of bizarre that trainers don't take this to heart. Incident reports, anytime something happens in your facility or you were a part of a particular injury or problem, emergency, you want to be able to write that down and have that so that if there is a need to bring you into court, you already have documentation. We always say that. And I've told you, I've run a large wellness center for a hospital, and these are the most critical things. You've got to have documentation. Correspondence. These are issues related to the HIPAA or the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. Read through it. This may or may not apply to your situation in a training facility. And then your legal responsibilities. So once again, you have a sample HIPAA form that goes back to what we're talking about. But again, you have responsibilities that are on the legal end of this. In the facility itself, there's things that you need to keep in mind, because even if you're just working for a health club, for instance, even though they have a general liability insurance, that doesn't cover your negligence if you do something specific with your client. It's just like a doctor, for instance, that works for a hospital. He still has to have insurance because of what he's doing with his patient, his or her patient. It's the same thing with you. You have to be able to look at the environment and make sure it's safe. Even if you don't want to sit there and say, it's the health club. They're the ones at fault. No, as a professional, you are at fault, and you can be negligent if you're training somebody, just as a for instance, and there's a wet area and they slip and fall. Yes, there's general liability coverage that the facility for sure has, but there's also you who should have been there to at least wipe up the water or whatever the case is. And so you get some understanding about that by reading through this area. Equipment, quality of the equipment, maintenance of the equipment. These are issues that can be thrown at you for negligence, right? Cables that are worn, they need to be replaced. But I don't own it. Yeah, but you better not train somebody on it, especially if you know that cable is frayed. You would be negligent. And if you've ever been in older health clubs, you know for sure there's lots of problem equipment. So and then there's the equipment that you should have available to you, such as the AED, right? Page 766 should have an AED available, automated external defibrillator, and know how to use it. And then of course there's the supervision component. There's general and specific. General supervision basically says that if I'm training 3 or 4 people at a time in a group, okay, there's a responsibility that I have from a general supervisory perspective. And then there is specific one-on-one training as a perfect example. Now, ACE gets into on page 767 the idea of online training. Don't be fooled by thinking online training is the easiest thing in the world. I don't even have to be. Oh, no. It has its own liability issues related to it, negligence issues related to it. In some sense, it could be even more challenging from a legal perspective. So you got to be really, really careful when it comes to even doing something like online training. And then, of course, the instruction component itself. Just keep in mind that you really want to be careful when it comes to spotting people, determination of exercises, because if you start doing exercises that are inappropriate for a client, they can sue you if they get hurt, and you have the onus of responsibility on you to prove and show that exercise was fine and the progressions you made were appropriate. You just don't want to get into any of those issues if you don't have to. So if you're unfamiliar, and that's really what this area is for. If you're unfamiliar with anything related to spotting or exercise choice, always go conservative, be more conservative. and make sure that you're comfortable with how to do exercises, how many reps and sets. That's why all that information is in here. Okay. Be careful. You got to be very, very aware, hyper aware of your client, what they're looking like when they're going through their routine. Are they breathing heavy? All of those things that that we looked at in the textbook, you got to bring into play, because there is a legal ramification to it if you're not comfortable. And then, of course, oh, and by the way, on page 769, I should tell you, the apply what you know box, safety guidelines, very, very good group of bullet points here that I would definitely recommend. That's a go-to information box. You should know. Scope of practice. You've seen this before. The idea with scope of practice is that you can basically do certain things legally and certain things you cannot do legally. Just be very careful that you do understand what your scope of practice is by what ACE has already gone through and explained to you. In addition, in the appendix, and I'll just show you here, in the appendix, you have, in fact, the appendix is the code of ethics. That's your code of ethics right there. Provide safe, and so you can spend a little bit of time knowing the appendix. So the scope of practice basically says you're a trainer, you're not a registered dietitian. You're a trainer, you're not a physical therapist. You're a personal trainer. You're limited to these activities, things you should and can do. Liability insurance is a no-brainer. You need to get liability insurance before you touch anybody. Just don't even question. Look, $250 right now a year for full coverage of up to about $1 million, depending on the company. I know ACE has a good partnership relationship with an insurance carrier. You can obviously check them out, and you definitely have to get liability insurance. Your liability insurance company is going to demand certain things from you, and it goes back to these forms. Okay, your liability insurance company, if you don't fill out the specific forms that your liability insurance company demands, if you file a claim, if you don't have those forms filled out, they're not going to cover you, and then you're screwed. So you get the idea. There's a lot to do here before you ever touch a client. So just keep that in mind. Employees and independent contractors. Again, as you're moving through this chapter, there's good information. Just keep this in mind. Good information. There's a difference between an independent contractor and employee. That's all that's saying on that page. Read through it. Take some appropriate notes as you need to. Other business concerns with legal implications. So marketing, social media, there's a lot here. Now they're touching on it. They're just touching on it, but you have to become almost an expert, a professional when it comes to understanding marketing and how to use social media and intellectual property. Okay, and ACE wants to make sure in the apply what you know box that you know the proper use of the ACE name and logo. Just read through that, because you can have some serious issues. Okay, if you're using music, that's what intellectual property is. If you're using music, you've got to make sure that the recordings that are intended for your business use, you got to pay for that stuff. So if you have your own little facility and you're just playing music, ooh, wait a minute, that's breaching the intellectual property clause. You're going to have to. Normally what you do is you purchase a like an annual contract with a company that allows you to utilize all this music. And so again, a lot of this stuff is just not known. Trainers just don't know to do this, and they just turn the radio on. Technically, you're breaching intellectual property guidelines. So transportation, financing. It's information. Read through it. It's helpful. Risk management. Now, you got to take a step back for a second, because one of the things we're always trying to do is to mediate risk legally, right? Mediate risk legally. And so here you have a recommendation, risk management protocol one, two, three, four, five variables, five things you need to consider. Risk identification. So you need to know what are the potential risks as a personal trainer in this facility. Then you need to evaluate it. Personal trainer, you should review each risk, and consideration is given to the probability that it will or will not occur. And you basically, you can assign, kind of a level of frequency to its selection of an approach for managing each risk. So it's kind of intuitive. What can happen? I mean, okay, well, my client can slip and fall. Okay. My client can drop a dumbbell on their head. My client can be using a band and it snaps, slaps them in the head. These are all risks that occur. I mean, that is the reality of working out in a health facility or health center, whatever the case is. Even if it's in your garage and you're just using some dumbbells, do not say to yourself, "Oh, nothing can happen." Don't say that, because it does. And of course, selection, implementation, the idea is that those are the things that can happen. What's the chances of them happening? Okay, so what's the chances of this, the band happening? Good chance, high chance, low. What's the case? Okay, now that I've sort of isolated that, what can I do to reduce the risk? What's my plan? Well, I'm not going to use the cheapo stuff that costs $5. I'm going to spend the extra money and buy the bands that have the cloth casing around them, so that even if the band, the rubber band inside breaks, it's protected by a sheathing of cloth. Just as a for instance, that is a mitigation. It's a mitigation plan, right? So you implement it, and then of course you evaluate it. Table 16.4. Evaluating risk based on frequency and severity. I know it sounds like a lot to do. All I want to do is help people. And well, no, you got to have your legal and business stuff in place. Read through the summary. Now, again, that's going to end chapter 16. And again, don't stop here. Go through your appendix. ACE has given you their code of ethics in the appendix. So I'm just going to shoot in here real quick. You should list, by the way, I would list these down: provide safe and effective instruction. Okay, that's the heading. You can go through the subheadings. Provide equal and fair treatment. That's number 2. Third one, stay up to date. Maintain current CPR. There's an explanation for each one of these. Comply with all applicable laws. Maintain. You should know all of these pretty much by heart. And then the subheadings that go with them. So that's chapter 16 and the appendix. It was a pleasure going through each of these chapters, and that ends the 6th edition study by study for the ACE certification textbook.